The title of my SSR book is My Swordhand Is Singing by Marcus Sedgwick. I think the author chose this title because it makes the reader think that there will be some action in the book. And I also, when I saw the title, I thought it was very interesting because who doesn't find swords cool? And at first, when I first looked at the summary and stuff, I'd always put this book off because it didn't seem that fun. I never really liked thriller, vampire mystery stuff, but I decided to read it for this SSR book, and it was actually pretty good. I always liked the title, I just never found the time to read it, but I really enjoyed this book, and I think it was one of the best books I read this year because I don't know, it was really interesting, and I liked how everything played out in the end, except for some parts, but I'll get to that later. So the main characters of this book, there's not many characters that play a big role, but they are named. The main character, the protagonist, is named Peter, and he is the son of another character named Thomas, and they are both woodcutters, and they, all of Peter's life, they have been moving from one village to another, and they've never actually settled in a place, but the setting of the book is where they finally kind of settled, and I'll talk about that later. But another character, she is named Sophia, and she is part of, in this book they call them gypsies, but I think in where the setting of this book takes place, which is the 17th century of England, they're known as the Romani people, and they are also kind of wanderers. The village that they are in has kind of a hierarchy, and there are these people called elders who run the village, and the highest elder is named Old Anna, and she kind of runs everything. So if she says something, that's how it happens. And then the main overarching antagonist of the story is called the Shadow Queen, and she is kind of the controller of all vampires, but the vampires in this book are called hostages, and there's lots of ways to stop them, but there's I think 1 or 2 ways to actually kill them. So basically how the book starts is, the first chapter is a man who is running from this thing that's chasing him, which, if you haven't guessed, is one of the vampires, a hostage. It's when they introduce this creature that's a horrifying creature that's threatening the village. But basically the man running away dies, and then later on it changes to Peter, who is going to the village due to a funeral that's happening, and the people of the village believe that the funeral was a suicide because the man who died to the hostage, or the vampire, was hung on a tree with his heart ripped out. But the people of the village were scared, and the elder, Old Anna, said that it was a suicide, so that's how it happened. And that's we get introduced to Agnes, who is Peter's love interest in the book. And then after that we switch we go through the chapters. I don't want to spoil everything, but things happen, and then later on more and more murders start happening, and Peter talks to his father Thomas, and his father Thomas is always saying everything is not true. They're all lies. But his father Thomas was actually part of like an army that was like, or not an army, but like an organization that fought against these vampires, and he was like trying to avoid it because he had a new life now. He was trying to escape it, which is why he was like going through these like villages and like living here, moving here, like all of that. And Peter just thinks his father, who is like a deadbeat alcoholic who's like abusive, is just like being angry again and just like not amused by what's happening in the town. And later on, more and more vampires start showing up in the night and killing people. And then Peter meets the gypsies who came to this town, and these gypsies are kind of like vampire hunters. They're like trying to hunt these hostages and stop them. And they were looking for Thomas because he has a special sword that can kill the vampires, which is one of the ways that they could die that I said. And then the gypsies, there's the one gypsy named Sophia that Peter meets, and this is also another like possible love interest. But throughout the book, something happens and Anna dies and becomes a vampire. And all the gypsies and all the people, or like Peter and the gypsies, they go to Thomas, and Thomas, like, they persuade him to help them fight against the hostages. And then they fight the hostages at the end. But old Anna was actually a hostage or a vampire, and she was working for the Shadow Queen to kind of like destroy the whole village. And in the end, Thomas sacrifices himself to kill the monsters, or like kill a lot of them. But he kind of like dies towards the end, and then Peter like saves the day. But he had this sword that can kill vampires. Another way was this like folk song that the gypsies sung, or like the people of the village sung, and that was like a way to kill the vampires if you truly like sang it with like your heart. And that's kind of like a way they saved the day, by like people singing and Thomas fighting with his sword. But the other ways to stop, I found this really interesting because it's part of like the folklore of vampires in England. But basically, they would use millet seeds, and if they toss them on the ground, the vampires have to like count each one before they can like fight you. They have to count and pick it up. And then another way was if you bury them, their body, because they only show up in the night. In the daytime, they like go back to their underground like burial area and like stay hidden. But if you bury them with charcoal, they cannot leave unless they've used up all the charcoal and have like written stuff. And in the book, an example is like they opened the coffin to kill the vampire, but it was empty, and all that was left was like just writing in charcoal of like horrid things about how much they hate humanity, which was really interesting. And in Doctor Who, there's an episode on like vampire like doppelganger things where they use like seeds on the ground to like make the vampires like pick them up, which I was like, oh, that relates to the book, which is pretty cool. The one character that I think developed the most is Thomas, because at the start of the book he is shown as like a deadbeat alcoholic father, and then towards the middle of the book he is like realizing his mistakes, and he starts telling the truth to his son and everything about his past life. And then towards the end, he sacrifices himself heroically, fighting off hordes of monsters. And my favorite quote is actually from that scene where, as Thomas dies, his son Peter picks up the sword, and Thomas says, that's it, feel it. And then Peter replies, yes, Father, my sword hand is singing. And I really like this line. It always gives me like goosebumps, because one, it says the title, which I really like in like any stories or anything. When they like mention the title, it always makes me like, wow, like I don't know, it's like a fourth wall break. That's not a fourth wall break, but it's pretty cool. And when he says that, before the page before that, he says, he says, my sword hand is singing. And then him repeating that is like, I think, a way of how Peter honors his father. And it's really cool how like he fights, and he's never, like, Peter has never fought before. He's just a woodcutter, but he like has this like inherent talent to do it. But one thing I would change about this book is that very part. At the end, when they defeat all the monsters, Peter gives this special sword that can kill vampires to one of the gypsy like leaders, instead of using it for himself to like be the hero, which I really hated, because I wish he was like more like, I'm gonna use this sword to avenge my father and kill all the vampires or something, like more like go on new heroic journey. But it still ended nicely, because he didn't just like give up. He still joined the gypsies, but he didn't use the sword, which I found a little boring. I wish there was like more action to it. But overall, this book was very good. I don't think it was meant to be like a story with a lot of action. So I get that there was not a lot of action, but it would have been more fun if there was a little more like exciting factor of more fighting. But I think that's just because I'm a guy, and I like find those things fun. But yeah, that was the book. It's a very good book. I would highly recommend it. It's a short read, only about like 200 pages, and really good plot. It makes you think about like, there's a lot of things in this book that are things that you need to know. Like, he expects you to know, like the author just expects you to know, because that's like the types of stories he writes. So it was really cool to like, I would read it and see something that I don't know and kind of search it up. And then now I'm like reading all this history of like English folklore from the 17th century. And that was really fun too. But yeah, that was my book.